Hi, everyone. I'm Marilyn, CEO and founder of Cosmic Centaurs and the host of this weekly live video series called Centaur Stage. We're in the middle of our second season, all about the magic of teams and what makes teams cohesive, high-performing, and happy. And this season, we've changed things up a bit, and we're covering 4 different chapters about team. We're in the middle of our first one on exploring team dynamics. So if you're into learning more about how teams interact, communicate, address conflict, and connect, you've come to the right place. Myself and some amazing guests go live every Thursday on LinkedIn at 3:30 p.m. UAE time, and we share insights, experiences, and perspectives on the topic. Before we begin, please show us some love, give this video a like. Of course, please do share your thoughts and ask questions in the comments. I'll make sure that Sylvia gets to answer at least a few of them during the show. And actually, let me start by telling you a little bit more about our guest today, Sylvia Burbery. Thank you so much for joining us, Sylvia.
It's lovely to be here, Marilyn.
All right, so let me tell everyone about you. So Sylvia is the Regional President of Emerging and Seeds at Royal Canin. She began her career with Mars in 1994 and worked in a number of roles across sales and P&O in New Zealand and in the US, including developing the framework for the transition to SBUs in the US business. In 2005, she returned to New Zealand as the general manager of the New Zealand multi-sales business, where she led a significant turnaround in the business results and culture, which saw Mars New Zealand win the GRA Best Place to Work awards. Then in 2009, she moved into the role of general manager for the Mars Pet Care business in Australia, where she was responsible for leading all aspects of the business operations for a team of over 1,000 associates, 4 manufacturing sites, 2 sales offices, and more than 14 well-loved and trusted brands. She did a brief stint in 2016 in a global strategy role, working on specialty pet care across pet nutrition and Royal Canin. And then her journey with Royal Canin began in early 2017 when she moved to Singapore as regional president for the Asia Pacific business. And then very recently into her current role, based in France, but with responsibility for emerging markets across Latin America, Southern, Eastern Asia, Africa, and CIS. And on a personal level, Sylvia has 2 adult children, and her partner also has 2 adult children. She recently became a proud grandmother, and she's passionate about family, health, and well-being, nature, and travel, and is committed to bringing herself to work and creating the conditions for others to do the same. I am so excited to be speaking to you, Sylvia, today. I'm so happy you joined us for this episode.
I'm really excited to be here too. It's a topic I'm passionate about. Although listening to that introduction, I realised how much jargon there is in it. We could probably do a better job of that.
It's okay. People love a bit of jargon. No worries at all. Well, speaking of jargon, let me introduce the theme for this episode. As those of you who have listened to our first 2 episodes of the season, you will know that in our first episode, we worked on defining what is a team. And then we explored how we can leverage data to enable high-performing teams. Today, Sylvia and I will talk about how to manage global distributed teams and what we can learn from managing teams at that scale and with that distance between the team members. Of course, the textbook definition of a global distributed team is that it consists of professionals working together from different geographical locations to accomplish common goals. These teams draw on benefits of international diversity and, thanks to technology, have been able to be more and more connected with each other in the last few decades. But we also know that the distance can be challenging, and often there are drastic differences between team members in terms of their culture, their beliefs, their language, their identities, not to mention their location and time zones. And all of these reflect on team dynamics. In a HBR article called Global Teams That Work, Seral Neely, who I wrote about this week on LinkedIn, so you can find a longer edition of this in a post that I wrote this week. She wrote that the main factor that distinguishes a successful global distributed team from others lies in the degree of emotional connection between the team members. So when we talk about co-located teams, even if team members come from different countries and culture, it's still a lot easier, obviously, to have informal communication, to have times for trust building and connection. But when you're a global and distributed team, of course, this becomes difficult. Video calls and emails are great, but they can be a barrier to these emotional connections. So we really wanted to come here and learn about the unique set of challenges that global distributed teams have, how to lead them, and how to empower them. And Sylvia is here today to share her experience on these topics. So let's kick things off with our first question for you, Sylvia. Of course, as we've heard, you've had a really long career with Mars, and you've gone across all layers of management, managing a team, managing a country, both co-located and distributed. I'd love to just start us off with, with all this management experience, what is the lessons that you've learned around the nature of teams, and what is the difference between managing a team of doers and managing a team of leaders as you do today? Because today, many of the people reporting into you are, of course, country managers. Tell us about, that big overarching lesson of what you see as being the right way to manage teams.
Yeah, I mean, every team, I think, first of all, is different because every team is made up of individuals. Every team has a different purpose and every individual is different. So I always approach a team with sort of understanding what the purpose is and getting to know the individuals, because the team is only the sum of the individuals and what we have to work on. And, I guess what I've learned over the years is we have a number of processes in Mars around what we call high performance collaboration. We focus on being clear on the purpose of the team, and this is that we have a facilitated process to help the team figure out what it's about, what its purpose is, what it wants to work on together, and what the ground rules are for the team in terms of how it wants to work together. And I really think that process, which is a very engaging and consultative process that really draws out, it's not the leader defining it, it's team defined, has been super helpful. And we use that same process with teams at all levels of the organization. So whether you're with doers or with leaders, I think you can go through the same process. What changes is the purpose, the outcomes, and the ways of working. And that's no different from any time you make a leadership transformation to leading. You're an individual contributor, you manage others, then you manage managers, and then you become a senior leader where you're managing other senior leaders. And each time you make one of those leadership transitions, for me, it's been a shift in how I operate and how I work. You become less and less involved in the tasks, I think, and more involved in creating the conditions to enable others to succeed in a very broad sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really incredible that, within Mars, you provided that framework, thinking around the teams. In episode 1, we were discussing with Connie, like what makes a team, and all of the things that you mentioned about that shared purpose and the ways of working are fundamental ways by which teams define themselves. And yet so few companies sometimes even know what teams are inside of them. We were talking about this in episode 2 with Sam as well. He was saying that in a lot of corporates, actually, the management, they can see the hierarchy, but they don't see the teams, right? And that's such a big change in the way that we think. So for you guys to actually have a clear process for how to facilitate the creation and the coming together of the team is quite incredible, actually. And so while I completely see how it's this, you can reuse this process no matter what the scale is and whether you're managing teams of doers or teams of leaders, tell us about what you've learned managing a global distributed team in the middle of a pandemic without the ability to meet most of them. What have you learned from that period?
Well, it's interesting because I was managing, my team in Asia was not fully globally distributed, but well distributed. I had 10 different time zones. But before the pandemic, I knew everybody. We'd worked together. We'd established some ways of working. And when we went fully virtual, we had to think about how we did that differently to maintain those emotional connections. But when I moved into this new role, I've got teams across 14, my team has 14 different time zones. And I've not been able to travel. We've not been able to all get together. We've had some have been able to travel and some have been able to connect. And so The biggest thing for me has been having to be incredibly intentional about making those connections, both with the team as a whole and with the individual members of the team. And, we've had even team meetings where some of the team have been physically co-located and some have been virtual. And I think those are the hardest because you have to work exceptionally hard. So, for example, we could all be sitting, we might have 6 members of the team in one room and everybody else virtual. Even if we're all in one room, we all have our own computers on, which means we can all be seen on the screen. Technology is amazing now in terms of what you can do, but that's just one example. And I think the intentionality around making time for the connection when you're virtual, allowing time for a check-in and making sure that there's time, an invitation, and almost an expectation of a genuine check-in and not skimming across the surface, I think is really important. And I've learned through the pandemic to do that both when we're together as a team, but more importantly for me as a leader of a team, to make the time to have those connections individually, really get to know the team as best I can virtually, so that when the team is working together, I can be aware of the nuances and the things that might impact the dynamic.
Yes, I think that's truly incredible advice. And it's always important to understand not just what a person says, but where that is coming from, and whether it's their culture or their personal individual preferences. You need to listen to them with as much context about who they are as possible. Otherwise, the space for misinterpretation becomes so wide. You and I also, previously when we've met in the past, talked about how you tried so hard in the early days to keep things synchronous, to make sure that you had meetings all together. And I think you've kind of played around with different ways of doing that now. Can you tell us a little bit more about it?
Well, when you have 14 different time zones, if you're going to be synchronous, you're going to be in the middle of somebody's night. And so we've really limited now the amount of synchronous time. We've worked really hard with the team to try and figure out when we need to have synchronous time. And so it does require a lot more planning and thinking about meetings. And we've now created more opportunities for people to do asynchronous work or small group work when we've got people who are in closer time zones. And so, if we're going to have a big meeting, there's often pre-work happening in subgroups so that people are bringing in those connections. Leveraging tools has been a big thing. So, we used to send emails with attachments. Now we put everything into a Teams site where people can work on it directly, and you can actually be typing and somebody else is typing and you can actually see what's happening. Really leveraging tools to be able to work asynchronously is absolutely critical. I would be the first to say I don't think we've cracked it yet. We still have way too many meetings where people are sort of early in the morning or late in the evening, but I think we're doing a better job of really being clear on when we need to connect. And, there's a desire to connect. We are, humans crave connection, I think. And so we had this one example where every 4 weeks we have a week and we would do a debrief at the end of the week, and it's about 2 hours. And we, sitting here in Europe, we're trying to be sensitive to the people at either end, and we offered to do the session twice. Once with the people at the Asian end and once with the people in the Americas. And actually the feedback from the team was they would rather have one session that required them to be out of time, if you like, but to have the connection with the whole team, that they actually felt that was more valuable than doing it the other way. So, for me, you think you're doing the right thing. Seeking to understand what's working for the team is so, so important.
Fantastic. Yeah, I think that's really important, and iterating, and also for the team to know that they can give feedback that'll be taken into account. You got to experiment until you find the right, place and the right setup and the right process. We have a question here from the audience that I think is also really interesting, which is asks, how do you think that the company values are brought into this dynamic? I know that at Royal Canin you are really so close to your values. How do you bring them into this global team and how you manage it?
Yeah, I think it is a great question. I mean, I'm lucky. I've worked for Mars for 28 years, and Mars is a principal company that puts what we call employees associates at the heart of things. So we have a strong associate concept, and that plays very strongly into the way we value teams and the way we value the individual contributions in teams. And I think that is a critical part of what we do. In Royal Canin, we also have a very clear purpose for our business around improving the health of cats and dogs through personalized nutrition. And because that purpose is so strong, it helps us create a real sense of purpose. So while the business has a clear sense of purpose, every team will have a purpose that links to that somehow. So it creates a connection. And I'm sure that makes it easier for us to create those connections in the teams. But I'm sure the same can apply in whatever industry you're in if you're clear on the purpose and the values.
Absolutely. And are the pets invited to the team meeting?
We were talking about that before. One of the things I actually love about virtual is that we get to see pets. I mean, we have pets in the office anyway, so we're lucky. But not cats so much. It tends to be people don't bring their cats to work; they bring their dogs to work. And one of the things I love is people with a cat walking past, or see them with a cat, whatever. But it's not only the cats and dogs. You get a glimpse into people's lives. Their kids come in and their spouses or whatever, and it's actually, I think, brings all of us. We become a little bit more real.
Yeah,
you're not just seeing the person at work, you're seeing the person in a very different environment, and it creates different conversations. I remember once talking to somebody who does all his virtual meetings from his workroom with all his tools on the wall behind him, because it was the two reasons. It was a place where he could be quiet from the family, but it's a passion of his. And so, it was just one example where you learn about people's hobbies as well.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, Millie, my cat, has interrupted many of my meetings. I don't let her come in when I'm doing a Centaur Stage, because that would be a bit much, but many people have met her over the last year and a half. I want to take us back to Dal Neely's article that I was mentioning earlier. She talks about how leaders can enhance connection, communication, and unity in their teams. And she's developed a framework that she calls the SPLIT framework. This framework has 5 components. One is structure, process, language, identity, and technology. We won't talk about all of them, but I wanted to touch on a couple of them and just get a sense of how you have incorporated that into your ways of working. Under the process component, she talks about the importance of being empathetic, being deliberate, all things that you mentioned earlier in our conversation, to have that unstructured time for informal conversations to happen between team members. How have you created that space for your team?
When you meet physically, it happens organically. People connect over a coffee, and I'm so excited. We're going to have our first full team together meeting in 2 weeks' time. And I'm so excited for that to be able to happen. Virtually, we've tried to create that in different ways. So we do a lot more small group work. We break our sessions up. And in small group work, there's always more opportunity for informal conversation. But I think that the thing that's been really important is we start every single meeting with this thing we call a check-in. And we ask people how they are, where they're at, what's happening for them. We understand what they're excited about in their personal life. That's been one thing. The other thing is we have a WhatsApp group and people share photographs. So I'll get photos in the weekend of somebody who's been hiking on a mountain, or somebody, during the week who's on a field visit somewhere, sharing photographs of the field visit, or somebody's just taken their kids back to school. So we create these. We've had to create different ways to create those opportunities for people to connect, to have those offline conversations that you would normally have face to face.
Yes, absolutely. One of the ones that I love, which team members of ours did during the summer, was, of course, we were all in different places around the world, and she asked us to share a picture of what we were seeing right there and then. And I think, as you say, being deliberate to create that space where people feel like it's okay to bring that piece of yourself. And actually, you might find a lot of points of connection with others when you do that is really such an important thing. Another component that Sadal mentions is the language component. Of course, we know that when we're a global team, then English might be some people's first language, but maybe not everybody's. And if that happens to be the language of the business, there can be some kind of power dynamics between those who do or don't speak the language as their first language. Have you found that to be an issue in your team, and how have you addressed it?
Like in my team, the people who speak English as a first language are in the minority. Royal Canin is headquartered in France, so and my team are very, very diverse. So it's something I'm conscious of. So firstly, when I am speaking English, I try and slow down a little bit. But also it's something we're really aware of, because when you're in a second language all day, it's tiring. And when you're doing that virtually, it's even harder. So, we're very aware of it. The thing for me around this, people being reluctant to share thoughts, I try and keep a bit of a tab on who's speaking or who's contributing, and making sure that I invite. And I don't want, you want to be careful about putting people on the spot, but I think making sure that people have the opportunity to be heard is important. And the other thing that I find actually very helpful with virtual is the ability to use the chat box, because some people find it easier to write than to speak. And actually, even going back to the informal thing, we often will have two conversations going at once. There's the business conversation happening, and then you've got the hilarity happening in the chat box. I recall one, we were having a quality conversation, but we'd started a conversation where I'd made a comment about we were the slugs of the month, because our sales results were not as we still grew quite well, but not as fast as the others. And we had all these photographs of slugs appearing in the chat box at the same time that we were, because it was the next speaker had come in and was starting to speak. So it can be a little distracting, but it does create space for people who prefer to communicate in a written form. And so just watching, being aware of who's speaking and creating the space. It's as simple as saying, hey, I haven't heard from you for a while. Have you got anything to add? Which to me is not so direct as putting them on the spot, but at least giving an opportunity for voices to be heard.
Yeah, I think that one of the skills that leaders have really had to develop is that facilitation piece, which maybe would have been different in person because it just maybe comes a bit more naturally. Or also because when you're in a room and you've been silent the whole time, you yourself will not allow yourself to do that. But in a video conference, it's kind of just easier to stay on mute, right? And that facilitation piece and being aware of the participants and bringing them in at the time that feels right for them is very important. And, we've talked about kind of those positive engagements, but we also know that good teams actually engage in a lot of conflict, not interpersonal conflict, task and process conflict, but nonetheless, it's such an important part of innovation and creativity. In a study we did, 60% of respondents said that face-to-face was still for them the most comfortable way of addressing conflict. And yet in a team like yours, that may not be possible for months at an end. How do you manage conflict in a distributed team?
Yeah, I mean, I think at its heart, it comes, you can't do any of these things in a vacuum. You have to create the conditions that enable conflict to be raised. And, I work really hard to create a space where people feel safe to raise different challenges. And, an example we were doing operating plan reviews for next year. So we were working together, and everybody was going, oh, this was great. And then one guy was great. He came in and said, well, actually, this didn't work for me. And one of the ways that I think you create the space for people to do that is to recognize. And it's not easy to sometimes be the different voice. So, we making a point of saying, hey, thank you. It's really good that you raised that. Actually, then that created some discussion for other people to raise things, which then allowed us to actually shift. So for day 2 and day 3, we improved the process. So I think it comes over time by making it okay for people to raise issues. I think, though, when you have tensions virtually, and if the tensions don't get addressed quickly, they can fester because you don't have those offline conversations. And then what's worked in teams that I've been in is to really identify where the issues are and take it again in small groups offline to understand what's behind the issue and then come back with proposals. But it does require facilitation, intentionality, awareness, all of those things. And I think it requires that space of safety for even the conflicts to be raised. Otherwise, you get stuck with the conflicts going underground, and that can be really damaging, I think.
Yes, absolutely. I think a related question here from the audience, from Marie, is how do you create a sense of trust between two people who've never met?
Time and making the time. So I always, so I have, 14, 16 people in my, it sounds terrible when I can't even count them, but I've got direct team members and broader team members. I make time for one-on-one conversations. When I started, I really talk about who I am, not just and what I'm here for, what's important, but I also ask them who they are, what's important to them. And, it comes with time and just building those relationships, getting to know what's important to people. And I think it sounds simple sometimes, but, I always say, treat people like people, get to know them as people. I think we get into a little bit of a trap sometimes at work that we get focused on the task or what has to be done. We do the meeting, we do the stuff, we forget that we're dealing with human beings. And, I always think, right, first, let's take the time to understand who we're dealing with, what you're about, and so by definition, I think that creates an element of trust. And then the more opportunities I have to demonstrate that I'm open to conflict and that I'm open to have people disagree with me, and that's a good thing, not a bad thing, the more I can reinforce that. And if you have one or two people in the team that trust you already, get them to seed something. If you're feeling that, I know that sounds a bit manipulative, but people need to feel safe and they need to know that they can raise an issue and that you're not going to come down on them like a ton of bricks. Sometimes they need to see that, and it's not fake, but like if I know that there's something there, I'll say, look, can you help me bring this out in the open so that other people will know that it's okay?
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. And I don't think that's manipulative. I think if you know that some people, they're more comfortable with you, maybe they've known you for a bit longer, and they'll be more accepting of you being harsh or giving a difficult answer than even bringing them into the conversation. I think that's that facilitation skill again, like, I don't know, Tala on my team who you just met, like, I know that she'll create the space for me to both to give me feedback very openly and never shies away from what she actually thinks, but also to receive it. And I think that other team members being able to observe that and be like, oh, and everything's fine after that? Yeah. It's all good, we're going to be okay. Conflict is great. And actually, I've been talking a lot with my team this week in particular about, like, don't shy away from that. It's such an important part of the collaborative and innovation process that you disagree with each other, and with me, by the way. I'm the first person you need to disagree with, because the leader always tends to come with this really actually unhelpful halo of like, oh, they must always be right. And there's nothing worse than having a team that doesn't challenge you, because then you get stuck as a leader. You never really grow and you never learn anything.
I couldn't agree more. And I think this sense sometimes of teams needing to be, everything's nice. It's, it's not. Conflict is an important part of team, but it's how you manage the conflict. It's how you do that in a way that's constructive rather than destructive. And, you can still have standards and still be trusted because people know that you've got the best interests of them and the team at heart.
Yeah, absolutely. So you also said treat humans like humans. And there's one more question I wanted to ask that's on more of like that relationship side. And I know that you post quite a bit about mental health on LinkedIn and about, how important it is to take time for yourself to recharge. And of course, it's not easy to be open and vulnerable about struggles with mental health. And we know that many people have been through, a tougher time during the pandemic, being isolated and not being able to see their families and so on. Just talk to us on this specific topic. How do you create space for people to bring their mental health to work?
I do it in two ways. I mean, at the beginning of the pandemic, I recognized that I needed to meet people where they were at. Some people were having a great day, some people were having a bad day. And I've talked about it. There have been times I've gone to meetings where we had something to do, and I've spent the whole time just listening to somebody's problems or tears or whatever was happening, and just being there in the moment to be there for them. And then setting another meeting. It doesn't matter if you don't get to the task, because you have to be where people are at. And so I think just being there, and it's that listening, being empathetic and being available. And then I think what helps is, I'm very open about my family situation. I have a son that's in the autistic spectrum who's dealt with a lot of mental health issues. And I think when I talk about that and it makes it okay for other people to talk about challenges that they're having. So, I think vulnerability as a leader, helps other people to feel comfortable to be vulnerable and to know that that's okay. And I think, there's always a limit. You don't want to tell everybody everything that's going on in your life, but being open about and vulnerable, I think, creates an environment that creates trust. So those two things, vulnerability and then availability, the two things go together. So that listening.
I think that's a really good duo. And earlier on, you said time and making time. Someone took note of that in the comments. So I think you're going to give us lots of sound bites to remember. We've spoken about, let's say, the people management side of managing global distributed teams, but I think we can't talk about it without also talking about the challenge for you as a leader to be up to date with so many different countries, and also to be able to both allow them to do the work locally that needs to be done, but also coordinate perhaps global or regional actions, which I guess is the more technical part of the job. But I've always, I've never ran a multi-country P&L, but I think it's a really, I'm really curious to understand, like, how do you manage to hold space for all of these different geographies and countries and markets, and then how much do you get involved in the local initiatives, and how do you then, on the other end of the spectrum, also help to coordinate global initiatives?
Yeah, I saw this question. I was like, oh my gosh, that's a complicated question to answer in a short time. But first and foremost, I guess I believe in empowerment. So I trust the general managers, and I'm leading a fairly senior team. So I have general managers and markets. I don't want to go in and tell them what to do, because that would be very disengaging for them. But I need to know enough to do two things: to ask the right questions, and to be able to think about where are the things that we need to drive across the region, and where are the things that we actually need to let them do differently. And I do that simply by asking questions, seeking to understand, and then putting the pieces together. And I'm the first to say, you said, I don't have all the answers. I've got a team. We do it collectively. We have regular business reviews with each of the businesses, which we do separately, where I hear what's going on for them. And then that allows me to share best practices. It allows us to work on where are the connective threads. And, I do the same. I'm a member of the global team, and we have the same sort of things. And then, I can feed that down. But it's just, it is just like a giant jigsaw puzzle, and you sort of figure it out as you go. But I guess it comes from trusting the people in the businesses, that they know what's best for their business, and then creating the threads where they exist.
Yeah, so you've spoken a little bit about like how that information flows, I guess, from the different scales of that fractal, because as you say, like, you're both overseeing a group of global leaders and part of a group of global leaders. Are there any specific learning moments where it's not so much about like, what are you doing in your country and here's how you can do better or whatever it is, but more about, well, here's something we tried somewhere else and maybe this is some best practice that we can share? Do you have a dedicated moment for that?
It's not, yes, we have done some of that. I was doing a judging a series yesterday where we've actually had people submit best practice ideas, and we celebrate them and those sort of things. But I actually think it's one of the roles for people in roles like mine is to we see best practices across different markets, and whenever I'm then having a conversation with another market and they raise something, I say, oh, have you done this? Talk to this person, and create those connections even informally. So it's, yes, we have some processes where we do it intentionally. One of the things we did, and it was in my team in Asia Pac, halfway through, it's probably 3/4 of the way through last year, is we actually did one of our team meetings virtually, where we just said, we asked everybody to come and bring what was the thing they'd learned the most about during the year. It was amazing. There was no frame on it. People talked about diversity. People talked about Generation Y. People talked about numerous different things, but it was one of those great informal sharing moments. So, I think there's lots of different ways that we do it. But knowledge sharing in general, sometimes having things on Teams where people can get access to them is important. But yeah, there's not one way.
No, absolutely. There's always a combination of things. We have a question here from the audience that I find to be really interesting, because we never ask these questions, but I'm going to go ahead and, do it. Tell us about a day in your life. What do you do?
At the moment, a day in my life is just a series of video calls a lot of the time. And, it can be, this week I'm doing year-end performance reviews with my team. So I'll have, an hour session with one of my team members doing, sort of a review on the year and what's their aspirations for the future and how can I help them from a development perspective. I might have 3 of those in the course of a day. I might have yesterday I was judging some of these best practice ideas that we wanted to recognize. That was another hour. I had, what else did we have? I'm just thinking about, we might be doing a business review. Oh, that's right. Yesterday we did a virtual visit to one of the markets where we were for 2 hours. They were telling us about what's happening in their market, doing some of their business review. My days are very varied, but they tend to be a lot of sitting in front of a series of video calls, having different types of conversations.
Yes, I think you posted about the virtual market meeting on LinkedIn.
Yeah, some of them, yeah.
Yeah, I saw one, maybe one in South America, and I thought it was just such a great initiative to just create space for people to come to showcase what they've been working on and to be able to share. I thought that was really fantastic.
And more than that, it's for us to learn. And, we always do, as part of those visits, we'll have a one-on-one with some of the talent at the next level down. We might do a town hall with the broader group. So, I certainly find I get to the end of the day and I think, man, I've been doing a lot of different things today. And yet I've sat in front of a computer all day. It's quite funny.
Yeah, I always bring back this image. I wonder if I said it in our last episode, in which case I'm sorry to be repeating myself, but I guess it's a strong image for me. Like, there are 2 images that I love about being a leader. One, you kind of brought up, is like when I asked you about how do you help people learn from each other. Like, I've always thought of leaders as, those telecom phone operators from like before there was like an automatic switch and they had to just like put plugs in the right places so people could talk to each other. I find that so much of the time, the job of a leader is just to do that and then let the people have the conversation. And another one that I really love from a professor of mine called Joe Santos, his vision of leadership and management is that the job of a leader is to reduce the sense of risk that everybody perceives so that their teams can do their best work, to take on, the risk coming from inside the organization, from the outside world. There has never been a more challenging and quote unquote dangerous time than the pandemic. How were you able to absorb, the volatility of the world around you and create a space of some sense of calm for your team to be able to operate during that time?
Well, I read and, I try and check in on things like the different news, and I try and get news sources from different places. I don't know about the rest of you, but I find today it's very hard to really figure out what's going on because the news always has opinion in it these days. So I try and read different sources. I listen to the intelligence from The Economist. I try and listen to their podcast. It's like 30 minutes with 3 different stories from around the globe. I don't know, it helps me keep connected. But I glean information in lots of different ways, and then try and really be thinking about what the impact is. At the end of the day, I feel my goal my part of my goal as a leader is to create the conditions for people to succeed. And that means a lot of the time importing stress and exporting calm, trying to help people see a path through uncertainty. And it doesn't mean that we know exactly where we're going, but exactly the way to get there. But if we know where we're going, we can figure it out. And giving people confidence and an ability to address the things. But, there are so many dimensions that impact us, political, social, environmental, financial, and it is just the same as for everybody. You're sort of trying to figure out what's going to be the impact here. And, my crystal ball is no better than anybody else's. So, you just try and make as much sense of it as you can and help the team to think about what's important.
I think that's really meaningful. I resonate a lot with that. I'm the kind of person who, some of my friends call me Google because there's no topic that I don't want to learn about. That's not to say that I'm knowledgeable about everything, but I think that, when I see a current pass, and it's a current of information or something that people are thinking a lot about, I think it's just my duty to go and be like, okay, how can we learn? How can we simplify? And how can we decide if this matters to us or not? And I think that's it's aggregating and simplifying content is also such a great way of leading. Has anything changed about you as a leader in the last 2 years?
I'm learning
about yourself.
I'm learning as a leader all the time, and certainly operating digitally and virtually it has been very different. I mean, I think I've always no, I don't think I've always sort of tried to lead with empathy, but I think that has been much, much more important in the pandemic environment. I think the intentionality of connection has increased because I think in this world where it's virtual, it's had to. And I think I've become much, much more conscious. I mean, I've always been a proponent of work-life balance, but I have the sense around energy and resilience. The boundaries between work and life have become more and more blurry, and I think we've had to get much more intentional to create space for people to say no, to give permission for people to put boundaries in around their life. And then another area that I think we're all learning so much about is diversity and inclusion. And again, these are things, the values that I hold dear, but I learn all the time. And, I've done some of the Harvard Business Review there's some surveys you can do around unconscious bias and, really learning about your biases and how that might impact you. And I feel really privileged to work for an organization that makes this a priority and where we're having fantastic conversations about these sort of things on a regular basis. But, I'm learning as a leader all the time. Those are probably just a few of the areas that I would say I've dialed up in the last wee while.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. With that, we're coming to the end of our conversation. Sadly, I mean, I could speak to you for another hour about this. I'm going to take just one last question from the audience here. Sajjan asks, "How do you encourage your team to go ahead and experiment?"
Well, this is we try and really talk a lot about test and learn, and we in the digital world there's a lot of test and learn. So. We try and create the space for that. And I think part of it is making it okay when things don't work. If you're going to test and learn, by definition, some things aren't going to work. So how do you celebrate when we choose to perish something? So it's often we sort of perish things and we want to put that in the back room, and but what did we learn from it? So celebrate the learning. And I think at the end of the day, how do I encourage it? It all comes back to the piece we talked about before around psychological safety and making sure that people feel that they have that right. But it is a big part of our culture. Again, Royal Canin and what we're trying to drive, we're constantly looking for new ways to do things. So that helps.
Yes, it helps to have a company that in its core reinforces experimentation. And the fact that you guys, that your Genesis story also comes from science and research is, I guess, also quite helpful. All right. Well, are you ready? It's time for our rapid fire round. So I'm going to start sentences and I want you to complete them. I have 5 of them. And the first is, the one thing that every team needs is?
Clear purpose, a framework, and an aligned ways of working.
Brilliant. The one thing that every team needs to avoid?
Groupthink. And that for me would be, we talked about the need for conflict, healthy conflict as a way to avoid groupthink.
Brilliant. A good team leader is?
Empathetic and open, and creates the space for every team member to be heard.
Oh, that's beautiful. The best book on teams is?
I'm going to plug for a book that was written by a colleague of mine, actually, somebody that I used to work with in Mars in the US, and he's written a book called, I thought I'd written it down, but I didn't, Lessons from Mars, and it's all about high-performance collaboration and teamwork, and it's from Carlos Valdez de Pena.
Oh, brilliant. Must get that one. I don't have it. And then your favorite team ritual is?
I probably talked about it a few times. I love the check-in because that's when we really get to hear where people are at that moment in time. And I think it's a key enabler for great conversation in the rest of whatever you're doing.
Do you have a favorite question that you ask during a check-in?
Probably what's going on for you, and then it's about listening and seeing where do I need to ask a question to unlock more of a conversation. So I start with something very broad, but it's the follow-up question that I think unlocks
the rest
of the conversation. Yeah.
Brilliant. Yeah, that's a great one. Well, Sylvia, with that, we've come to the end of our time together today. Before we leave, I just want to really thank you for taking the time. I know you just came back from a vacation and we plugged this into your calendar. So I'm sorry for starting the string of virtual meetings that you'll be having, but I'm really so grateful that you took the time. And you will see once you wrap this up in the comments, the response of the audience today has been really overwhelming. And I didn't want to, maybe put you on the spot, but there's some really beautiful compliments that you've received. And I hope you take the time to read them later. And I'm really thankful for the audience for coming and engaging and sharing their, responses to the things that you were saying and some of their questions. Of course, the video is available here forever, and we'll be reposting it as well on YouTube and on our website in the coming weeks. I just want to give a shout out to my team at Cosmic Centaurs. I just show up here and just talk and try not to say anything stupid, but they're the ones doing all the hard work and pulling the work, and they really love the content that we create and spend so much time crafting it every week. So a shout out to them. And if you do like the content that we're creating, please, just subscribe or sign up or follow us. It'll make the team really, really happy. Every time someone new follows us or downloads something from our website, we share it on our channel and we celebrate. So really, every single person is important to us. So here's my invitation for you to, give the team a bit of a positive boost today. If you're a curious learner like us, we promise we'll always try and share meaningful content. You can also subscribe to our newsletter. And then lastly, I just want to invite everybody to mark your calendars, because next Thursday, November 18, same time, Thursday at 3:30 p.m., Dubai time, I'll be joined by David Munir-Nepti, who's the CEO and GM of Bloom EMEA. We'll talk about how to nurture teams. You don't want to miss this. For those of you who remember, Munir was one of our warm-up speakers for the Future of Teams conference, and he did all sorts of crazy things and crazy magic on the screen, and his energy is truly contagious, and we can't wait to hear everything that he's going to share with us next week. So please do join us on Thursday. And Sylvia, once more, thank you so much again for taking the time to be here today. I'll sign us off.